I want to welcome two new members. Principal at Igwell, Mr. Tim Pettigo. Nice to have you. And Leanne Hayes, Oakland High Librarian. Thank y'all for joining us. Okay, Ms. Page, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. I'd like to start just really quickly for our new members of our committee, giving a brief explanation of what we're doing today, give a little guidance. This is a special committee established by the board to help give feedback on policy that will affect the whole district. We always tell everyone that these policies are recommended from all sorts of sources: principals, the community, board members, administrators. And so this is really the place to get some of the groundwork and the thoughts on how to make these successful. So please feel free to be as honest as you are comfortable with us. At the end of the day, we encourage healthy debate so that we can get the right answer. If there's a policy that's particularly tough for this committee, don't be scared to ask for more information, and we can bring it back. If there is a legal reason that I might encourage us to adopt it today, I'll let you know. You'll also notice in your packet, you should have a copy of all of the agenda changes. In an effort, as you can imagine, some of these policies we have burned through quite a bit of ink. So I thought it would print gray. I apologize to that. Ms. Moore noticed that it did not, but you'll be able to, as we go through, I'll make sure to pull up on the board the policy we're looking at so that you can see in yellow the exact language that was changed. So I apologize for that. I thought it would print gray, but I was wrong. All right, so I promised Mr. Estes an hour, so let's get going. Policy 1.400, school board meetings, amended to prohibit board members and staff participating in board meetings from utilizing cell phones while the meeting is in progress to avoid conflicts with sunshine laws.
Any questions? Okay, we have them. Do I need to vote on that? I guess I do, don't I? Have a motion to approve? Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, next policy is policy 4.700, testing programs. This policy is amended only to update test names and clarify when final grades will be referenced. So here is that. As you know, we went back and forth between TCAP for a while and then TN Ready. So this concludes and shows you that it's just going to be TCAP. And we also had a period of time where that 15% was a tiering, and that's over now. So it's just 15% across the board.
Questions? Have a motion? Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
This policy, I do want to point out the asterisk. As you know, we are coming quickly to the beginning of school, and some of these policies are going to include changes that are necessary for our distance and virtual learners. It's going to be necessary for making sure we're safe if we come back to the building. And so a few we have legal requirements to have in place before our next board meeting is called. So the policies that are indicated with an asterisk, after the 6:30 meeting, they're also going to be on the board agenda for immediate adoption unless this committee has a strong objection. If they do have a strong objection, we'll make it work and we'll pull it off. Some of the Title IX and things like that, I would encourage you to move forward on. It's a model policy from the TSBA. But if we do have objections on maybe some of the COVID-related policies, let me know, and when we get to that board meeting, I will strike it from the agenda. Just to let you know. So this one is the first one that's like that. Policy 6.200, attendance, and this added an attendance expectations for our distance and virtual learners, and here is that language.
Any questions on that?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. So it says here that the students must be interacting and responding to instruction. So we've had some go back and forth and uncertainty as it pertains to distant learning anyway. So does this mean that the children will be expected to be 6.5 hours at a designated time during the day?
No. So the attendance policy is written to accommodate some of that variation. We're going to likely see different options for the students. Some of it may be live and interactive, some might be preloaded. So we have synchronous and asynchronous opportunities for our students. So we'll work with families to accommodate those needs. We understand that, especially with our distance learners, we're going to have parents that are having to balance working schedules and things like that. This attendance policy is written to allow multiple different avenues for students to engage in that instruction so they can get that the counting present there. But there is that expectation that it is 6.5 for most of our students. Our younger kids have a requirement, but 6.5 at some level in some part of that 24 hours interacting with that instruction.
Okay, so it's going to vary by
It will vary.
teacher, essentially. Okay. Okay, so let's just take the first one, and I don't mean to over-discuss this here, but submission of an assignment for the class. So essentially, the student doesn't submit it on time, they submit it late, but they still get credit for then attendance? Is that what you mean?
What I mean is if the assignment is given to them and they go and do the assignment, the time in which they did the assignment, and there will be a group that, they have an amount of time to finish it.
Okay.
That would count as part of the 6.5 hour instruction.
Any other questions? We have a motion.
Move to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Moved on you. Policy 6.203, school admissions. This is amended to require all families to complete the student residency questionnaire prior to being provided with an affidavit of residency or being denied enrollment to ensure compliance with board policy 6.502. This is recommended by the Department of Education, and we went ahead and started this at some of the schools last year anyway. We were having an issue where sometimes families weren't articulating to our enrollment folks exactly their living situation, and it sounded like they were living with somebody. So they'd give them the affidavit that we require for that. Then we'd find out later that they're in a much different situation, and really they should have been Atlas or identified as a homeless student, and they went through a lot of work to get that affidavit done that they didn't need to. So we don't want our families that are already struggling to get caught up in a process they don't need to be a part of. So we want to do that Atlas check first before we give them anything else.
Okay, questions? Have a motion?
Move we approve.
Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
This policy, you'll see there's no highlighting because it's almost a full rewrite, generally removing some references to Title IX that we've broken out into an independent policy. This is policy 6.304, student discrimination, harassment, bullying, cyberbullying, and intimidation, and it is rewritten to clarify the process and definitions in light of the Title IX rule change you'll see later.
Questions on that? Have a motion? Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Policy 6.319, alternative education. This is amended to reflect changes made in the law under Public Acts of 2020, Chapter 603, and State Board Education Rule. What I'll tell you about this policy is I sent this draft to Ms. Sides and Dr. Brown before I brought it to you all, and they were confused because they said, this is what we already do. The reason for that is the law that passed last year left a lot of questions, more questions than answers. And we were very fortunate in Rutherford County that through us collaborating, we actually guessed right, essentially. We filled in those holes in a way we thought made most sense. And the legislator ended up adopting a law that pretty much put exactly what we already did as our practice into law. So this adds officially the process that we ended up having essentially in place last year. So some of the changes you'll see is it returns some discretion to Mr. Spurlock when it comes to determining remandments and modifications. If you remember, last year we were required to send any student for any amount of suspension time to the alternative school. Even if it was a single day, they had to be in some sort of alternative program, essentially eliminating out of school suspension as a disciplinary option. They've clarified now at the request of the TSBA that it's really only going to apply to kids that have 10 days or more. So in many ways, you should see alternative school operating very similar to the 18-19 school year. It's almost a return to normal with some changes that we like. I think it still continues to emphasize the need for creative disciplinary options, and it allows us to continue to show in the law that our alternative programs are important. So I think it does continue to require it to a level that will allow us to justify their continued existence and expansion.
Any questions on that?
I do have a question on this. So if I'm understanding correctly, this language here at the bottom, line 29, is new. Students who have committed zero tolerance offenses are not required to be assigned to alternative schools or programs? Yes. Which was not the case before, so I guess I'd appreciate some elaboration. The zero tolerance offenses are pretty serious offenses.
Zero tolerance, they have to request modification.
That's right. So in 18-19, this is what this is returned to. If a student has a 0, they're supposed to be out for a calendar year. But they have the option to request from Mr. Spurlock a modification. We are very generous in that. We want our kids in schools learning. The intention of the law last year was particularly aimed at capturing students who may have a low-level drug offense and receive a 0. The legislator wanted us to stop putting those kids out for a year and allow them to come to the alternative school. In Rutherford County, we were pretty much already doing that, but other counties, those kids were out. So the way they wrote the law, in my opinion, accidentally, was overly expansive and essentially made it where we could never put a zero-tolerance student out of school, even with violent offenses. This would allow us to go back to the old model, which would be students with 0s don't have to be assigned to the alternative school, but they can request modification. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, so in other words, the director
Can actually put them out as in expel them, like,
It's actually assumed it's the other way.
The other way around, they're all, once they receive the zero tolerance, they're out for one calendar year. However, under the old policy, they can request modification from the director of schools. And I think what you're saying is because of the law, the way it was written, they could not occur last year.
They had to go to
They
alternative.
had to go. This way, it goes back to the discretion of the, and we've been doing this for many years.
Yes.
Very seldom do we have anyone turn away unless it's for a violent offense.
Yes, and the last year we were still, for our most violent offenders, we were utilizing the safe space language of that law to say you have to, the only exception to the alternative school was if staff and space allows. For some of our students that we truly could not house safely in the alternative school, we were relying on that as a justification to not enroll them. Now we have a clearer path to justify, I think in a more genuine way to the public, why a student is not being placed in an alternative school. Pretty much 99% of our kids, if they get a 0, they're going to alternative school. It's a small exception for someone who might be charged with attempted murder or something like that, where we're waiting to see how that happens, or if they have a gang affiliation at that alternative school and we don't want to put them there. So those rare circumstances are the ones where we'll put them out for a full year, or if they receive a 0 while inside the alternative school. Those are really the only times I've ever seen us actually expel a student for a full calendar year. So this goes back to how we used to do it, essentially.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? We have a motion?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Policy 6.409, reporting child abuse. This is also an extensive rewrite, so you won't see any highlighting. Former 6.409 to incorporate new legal requirements passed in the most recent legislative session. The most notable change is the requirement to designate a child abuse coordinator and alternate at each school. I'll also tell you there's another change that it used to be that if a student was subject to abuse at school from somebody, we had to report that we filed the DCS report to the parents plus provide all evidence. That has been eliminated, and the contact is now the Department of Children's Services. And the intent of that law is to stop children from having to tell traumatic stories to multiple parties. They want one contact, DCS, that's the contact. So we will have a new training for our staff and teachers this year on this policy, and all schools will have a designated person to facilitate those child abuse reports.
Any questions? Have a motion? Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Policy 6.503, homeless students. This is exactly like that other one that we did. This is making sure that we do that residency questionnaire before we do an affidavit. Go to where that is. There it is.
Any questions on that? Have a motion?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, now we're on to our brand-new policies, so you won't see any highlighting. These are all brand new for this year. Policy 3.204, Threat Assessment Team. This policy enshrines the requirements of Public Chapters 394. This allows for the creation of a district-level threat assessment team charged with overseeing threats and establishing procedures for the management of threats across the district. So this would be different than our school-level teams that we already have. And I had Mr. Krim give this one a look over, and he made his edits to it. And said that he was on board.
Question? Have a motion? Thank you. Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
All right. Policy 3.2041, this is pandemic epidemic face covering and mask requirement. This was my effort to enshrine into policy the motion of the board with some more details in light of our meeting last week. So this is what we have here. I will tell you, I think that we are going to need procedures to help flush some of this out for enforcement for our teachers, understanding when exceptions can be made, and we will make sure that we get those drafted as soon as we can as well, depending on how we all feel about this policy, obviously.
Any questions on that? Have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. Because, the more data we're reading and the more things that are coming out, there are an awful lot of indications that wearing a mask in a lot of cases can cause more harm than it does good.
And I've had a lot of people ask me the question of course, our mayor mandated or gave a countywide type of, I don't know if it was a mandate, but whatever it was called. And it specifically said in that the children under the age of 12 were not required. So I guess in retrospect, looking back on this now, how are we able to do that when the county and many, many medical doctors are saying it really isn't safe for kids under the age of 12 to be wearing them?
I can't speak to the medical doctors. I think that's unfair for me to do. I don't have that expertise, but I can speak to the law. I saw the same thing happen with Wilson County. Wilson County did not vote to hold masks because they were concerned about Executive Order 54 and its incorporation into a county order. So I was curious too before our meeting. I thought that might come up. So I reached out to the TSBA attorney as well as Christy Ballard at the state to figure out where are we on mask mandates and how does it intersect with that executive order. And they gave feedback that ended up matching the Attorney General, which is we are well within our jurisdiction to make that mandate from the legal perspective. Because the Executive Order 54 from Mr. Lee's office, Governor Lee's office, it is aimed at county mayor's orders, and it's expressed that it's to county mayors. This board has its own independent control under the statute over schools, independent from the county mayor. So I always want to defer to the policy considerations for you all. That's not for me. But from a legal standpoint, you absolutely have the grounds to differ on that policy from the county mayor. So again, I can't speak to the medical doctor part, though.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Page, I appreciate that explanation. And I want to go back to the initial point you made when you first introduced this. You said that we need to have some procedures to back up this policy.
Yes.
I would agree. We're going to implement a policy. Now, is that going to be on a board level, or is that going to be on a school-by-school level?
It will be a district-wide procedure that the director will work on. It's to encapture that number 6. The director can create exceptions and alternatives. So we want to know, the question, yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Goes to all the administration. So they in turn give it to the teachers so that they understand how it applies this under the circumstances that would make an exception to anything within this.
Okay, perfect. I would just like to see that done as soon as possible, which I know you're already working on it, but that way we have something to back it up. So thank you for clearing that up.
Of course.
Mr. supposed to wear pants unless you have here, hold it up. So, if I was in a middle school with 1,300, 1,400 kids, I would probably ask every single child who didn't have a mask, did you wear your mask, you need a mask, you know. So how are the teachers going to monitor that? I mean, the child who doesn't have the mask will probably be stopped until they know who they are, you know, the ones, I mean, how is that going to work?
One of the things we could do with our distance learning program, we could have that person or kids in a certain classroom where there's spacing taking place and put them on distance learning. That's one of the things. The second thing, we're giving parents an option. They don't, I mean, that's what was in our original plan, was traditional with an option of doing distance learning. So I think when it rises to that level, first the first thing we want to do, we want to try to work through the problem. And then we want to get to where we solve the problem. And if the problem persists, then we're going to have a parent, I mean, it's like any other disciplinary issue. We're going to have parents come in, we might have to talk with them.
Well,
See.
I mean,
Well, keep in mind now, as we're looking at what we discussed on July the 9th, transitions from classroom will be different. There won't be as much movement about, so it's going to be very, very obvious who isn't wearing a mask. Now, as far as the part of redirecting them, we first get, we may not have them. That's the reason why we've got, how many coming, Mr. Lee? How many additional masks coming? You may not have heard the governor today. They're open.
It's 10 or 12 per child. I mean, it's a bunch.
It's a lot. So we address that part. And if that's not a problem, then it gets to be an issue where they're not going to be compliant. We would treat it the same way we do anything else.
I just wondered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's different.
Well, he doesn't have to wear a mask.
Right.
So that's
Absolutely.
not.
Sure.
So I'm trying to avoid, one, the child that doesn't have the mask being asked constantly, because they're going to be out. You think
Oh,
they're
absolutely.
all going to be in the room, but they're going to travel,
Yeah.
and just, I don't know if they would have a little thing they could show that says they don't have to have a mask, or,
And I think something like that.
I mean, something may need to be done for
And
that.
that's where she talks about the administrative procedure. On that process, we would have to have something that would indicate why they're not wearing masks.
Yes.
Now, I would even with that, however, I would make sure that there's appropriate enough distance learning or spacing, social spacing, whatever they call it, that it wouldn't impede on other kids within that building or in that school.
And I would suggest that each school create some fabric that they make their own masks that have the
And you got one right
teeth.
there behind you right there. Did you make that? Did you call that song? No, it's a good look.
Because I would love that, in elementary schools too. So
Yeah,
I'm thinking you can make it not only safe, but a cool thing to do.
And there's a lot of, quite frankly, there's a lot of vendors taking advantage of that right now that are selling. I'm sure that's where they bought theirs. Is that not correct? How much y'all pay for that?
That's Kevin Creasy special, I'm not sure.
Looks good.
I've got another question, because when we talk about contacting the supervisor of building to discuss alternatives, that concerns me too, because when you say discuss alternatives, are these kids or these adults that are coming in the building going to be asked about medical conditions? Because we are really, really crossing some lines here. So who makes the determination of legitimate medical limitations?
Sure. There is a lot, in my opinion, misinformation out there about the ADA and how it applies to COVID. There are a lot of limitations in our typical day for employers on when you can ask an employee medical conditions. I spend a lot of time training our principals that if you have no reason to doubt that person, don't even go there, right? I think that same thing stands true here. We're going to have principals who know their kids and know some of their staff, and they don't have to get into that discussion. But there are going to be times where we do. And the ADA does allow for medical inquiries and even examination if it has to do with a disability that's not immediately obvious, that the accommodations being offered impact the essential functions of their job, or it poses a danger of safety. Currently, the Department of Labor from the U.S. Department has said COVID right now under a declared pandemic is considered dangerous and a safety issue. For us, in addition to that, teachers being safe with their students and around their students is essential to their job. So 2 of the 3 pathways under the ADA to make that inquiry, we check. So at that point, we have already started the process of talking to our teachers, asking them, bring us some medical information. Because I do want parents who are concerned about that to understand, we're not just going to tell people you don't have a mask. We're going to have alternatives, a reasonable accommodation, whether that's greater spacing, face shields we've talked a lot about, and other options, distance learning options. So there are ways to have that conversation. To me, the most important part is that conversation needs to be confidential. If a teacher is going to be vulnerable, it's definitely a concern. I've created a SWAY document for all of our principals to remind them of trainings I've done in the past and how to have those meetings and how to be sensitive to those information and talk to them a little bit about what they should be getting. The biggest thing is if you've gotten enough where you can say, okay, then stop and make that accommodation. The ADA and all the trainings I go to always say, it's really supposed to be like, how can I help is really where you're supposed to be. And so we're trying to meet those needs safely, but the ADA also has to account for the other people in that building. So the people who have immunosuppression and things like that, they equally have a right to be there and accommodated. So balancing the needs of someone who cannot wear a mask with someone who it's essential the people around them have a mask is a challenge. And it is going to require inquiry from medical providers to figure out what's best.
Any other questions?
I have an additional question as it pertains to number 5. The policy shall automatically expire on the last day of the school year. Maybe I'm being overambitious here, but I would like to see something that states, maybe that gives the discretion to the director, that if we reach good numbers, which is what all of this is predicated on anyway, that we can remove that requirement or loosen it without having to come back and revisit the policy.
I love that. I agree with you. I knew we could bring it back up to a meeting and cancel it early, but gosh, it'd be nice to just take off the books as soon as we can. I think that's a good addition.
So is that going to be, you'll work up language for that, because I agree with Ms. Johnson. You'll work up language for that and come back to the committee with it then, or?
We are not going to be, I think,
We're not going to do a second reading, right?
we're not going to do a second reading. So I got 2 options for us. I anticipate we'll do the policies after you all vote tonight. If it's voted on that's distance learning, we'll bring it back to our meeting, we'll do our normal process. We'll be thinking forward to when we're having folks in the school, and we'll do our very best on an internal procedure in the meantime so we can get it exactly how y'all want it. And we'll just have some general rules, most of the other information in a procedure that we can put in place in case we do have some kids still come into school. But if you all choose to continue on our path that we're on now, we can, on the record, amend the policy in the motion to adopt it to include that change, so that we can still do it tonight if we want to make sure it's in place. But we can do in your oral motion, I'll make sure I have it written down how it might be helpful to phrase that motion for you all, and I'll work with Mr. Reed before we get going so that you all can verbally amend it, and then I'll make sure that you get a copy tomorrow before I actually upload it for the TSBA. You can verify that it says it how you all want it to be laid out. I don't know if either of those could work.
Anyone else? We have a motion. Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right. This one's a little less interesting, I guess. It's a good thing, but it's already in place essentially. This is policy 4.205, which formalizes the enrollment in college level courses can count as a credit. We already do this, but we just haven't had the actual policy, so here it is.
Question? Have a motion?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Policy 5.605, staff gifts and solicitations. This policy sets out restrictions on employees receiving gifts and protects employees from solicitation while at work. Some people ask me if there's something sparked to this. Nothing actually sparked this. I noticed that it was cross-referenced in the bottom of many of our other policies that generally say the same thing, but we didn't actually have this policy yet. So we use TSBA model policies, and some of our former policies made this cross-reference, assuming we had it, but we didn't yet. So I brought it for you to complete that circle.
What do you consider tokens?
So this is something I talked to our assistant superintendent of budget and finance. I think we're going to need to define this in a procedure. The state says $25 or less, or if it's edible, put it out for everybody. We might go with that, but we can make an internal procedure to define token, because we're going to have to. I think you nailed the problem with this policy.
I mean, you've got to have tokens.
100% is going to have to be defined.
Any more questions?
I have a question. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. So this does not count towards, say, a parent wants to donate money to the teacher's classroom. This is for personal. Like
That's exactly right.
for Christmas, I want to give the teacher $100. That's not okay.
That's exactly right. So we have a gifts and donation policy in Chapter 1 that will address that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Have a motion?
So are they going to put something in there to define token?
It would be an internal procedure since it's employees. And a lot of times if it's internal to our employers, employment only, not involving the public, we'll do it by procedure. And that way we can get extremely detailed. That is something we could add to that. It might, I think that usually we assume, yeah. Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's a good addition. This is not one that this is by no means an emergency, so I can bring this one back with that edit.
Well, yeah, I know some, in elementary schools sometimes, they will take up money from each child. So the teacher would be getting a gift that is $100, but it's from each child and, not that much.
I think that's something also in the procedure we can define a group gift. And make that token value per student potentially, because I also don't want our kids, I've seen some of the beautiful things that they've done for our teachers. I don't want to discourage things that we know are not swaying that teacher. So that's something also we could address in procedures is class gifts versus individual gifts. That helps, it helps assuage the fear that there's some sort of grade, quid pro quo going on.
So we're going to bring this one back?
I think that's a good idea. These are all good things that we may just want to have right in the policy.
Okay. We'll move on to the next one then.
All right, this is 6.3001. This is a code of conduct supplement to address some of the new things we might face as we look at the school year this year. So just to give a brief overview, we have our bus and transportation expectations. These are all pulled from the already adopted policy and procedure from the board related to our buses, so obeying assigned seats. The face covering requirement is also in here. What we went back and forth on, and you'll see this is different than school, is we don't want students to ever be at a bus stop with no one at their home and then they're turned away. We cannot have that. The only time that we ever deny a student access to a bus is if they have already been suspended and their parents have been notified. So we want to make sure that that remains true. So if a student arrives at a bus and does not have a mask, we are requiring that bus driver to allow them onto the bus and to provide them a mask. And this can't become a habit. It's supposed to be one time. I'm sure so one time is what we want it to be. We don't want this to be abused because of the expense of providing the mask and also of the need to comply. If that doesn't happen, then they would, when they get to school and they have it, say it's the second, third time you've picked up a student and they have not had a mask and they've told you, I'm not going to bring one, I won't wear one. When they get to the school, they'll go through the discipline with the administrator who will go through our normal bus suspension procedure. We don't want a kid turned away without that notice. So that was an important addition that I worked with Jason Everett on. And windows, we're going to try to keep windows down, so this is just a reminder to obey that order. And then here are our at-school behaviors.
Okay, any questions on that?
So are you going to have to run added routes, more buses, so that they'll all have a seat?
Currently, that's why we knew we needed masks on the bus at least, because right now we're not able to socially distance perfectly on buses. So we did not add routes.
Anyone else? Have a motion? Thank you. Have a second? Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, our last policy, and it looks like I did well with my hour time. Policy 6.
You're not through yet.
That's true. Oh, that's fair. Hopefully this one will go quick, unless you're a teacher, because there's going to be lots of fun training. You'll get to see Precia and I doing our road show. Policy 6.3041, Title IX, and sexual harassment. This summer, the Tennessee Department of Education, that is wrong, let me edit that. That's the U.S. Department of Education, adopted rules that fundamentally change the requirements for investigating Title IX matters, and this policy is an enshrinement of that new process. A very brief synopsis for you all. The policy coordinator position is more significant. Any reports of sexual harassment have to be made directly from the employee with knowledge to the Title IX coordinator. Precia Alliance has been our Title IX coordinator, and even though this has, I think, we don't know the volume that this will create, she has volunteered to continue in that role, and we're going to try to take some data for this board on what that looks like, because I do think that hopefully, in some ways a good thing, our reporting should increase so that they get those supports from the district level. The also substantial change we need to train our employees on is the knowledge expectation. It used to be that there were only certain mandatory reporters, and now any employee of the district, any contractor of the district that knows or should have known of anything that's defined in this, that's relationship violence, dating violence, stalking, inappropriate photography, which unfortunately we know we deal with, that has to be reported directly to the Title IX coordinator. So I think we will see a pretty significant increase, just because many of these things are things that principals have handled at the school level, and I think they still are absolutely able to do that. They'll just have to make sure they're working with Precia so that we follow all the procedures that need to be followed and provide the resources that need to be provided.
Ms. Page?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not, the new,
Oops.
that's not up there on the screen, so was there anything that was actually different?
This actually, the entire policy is new.
Okay.
So, yeah, this is brand new.
So does it replace a sexual harassment policy that we already had in place?
It does. It fully replaces it. Our last one was tied more into that broader bullying harassment policy. We had a Title IX breakout that had Precia's information in some of these definitions, but not in this detail.
Okay.
And it also did include some of our reporting language.
Got it, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions? Have a motion?
Move to approve?
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Page. Budget amendment.
Got a budget amendment here on this, it's written out of the policy. Yeah, I think this is the first amendment.
I think it has to be a full board meeting.
We did it wrong. There are, Mr. Reed. Correct.
So we'll wait on that one. Ms. Page, Ms. Lyons, thank you. We are done.